We are live. How is everyone? Is this thing working? I am completely out of my comfort zone because this is my first YouTube live stream. And yesterday I was doing my first Instagram live stream. It's all going well so far. So I am going to read you some clips from a letter that May Alcott Nieriker sent her sister Louisa in 1874 and Louisa's reply. And also chapter All Alone from Little Woman. Let's do this. And May wrote this after she had got married. So she is happily married and living in France. I have never dreamed of such serene happiness as I have known since Friday, when as a man and wife Ernest and I left Southampton. My future seems so full of beauty and of joy, I can think of nothing else. The lonely artistic life that once satisfied me seems the most dreary in the world. Our tastes are so congenial, it seems impossible that we shall ever clash, and even were it otherwise, I find myself for the first time quite willing to bend to a stronger will and wiser head than my own. Ernest is so gently yet so firm, and I know he loves me so tenderly that I yield easily. So you see how changed is your wilful, strong minded sister. She's as gentle and sweet, dear Nanny, as yourself. So May seems very happy and very much in love. She is as gentle and sweet, dear Nanny, as yourself. She kind of seems to say that she has become a bit more like her sister, a bit softer. It's very interesting. And let's read what Louisa is saying. Little moment, I am browsing here. Happy letters from May, who is enjoying life as one can but once. Then, with a sudden vision of her own lonely lot, she exclaims, how different our lives are just now. I so lonely and sick, and she so happy and blessed. She always had the cream of things and deserved it. My time is yet to come somewhere else, when I am ready for it. Not only is she incredibly lonely, but she envies her sister's marital happiness and wishes that she would have a partner. But let's go, Little Woman. So this letter that Amy sent from Europe after she and Laurie got married. And now Little Woman was written decades before these letters were sent. So did Louisa May Alcott have prophetic powers? Perhaps. It is so beautiful to be loved as Laurie loves me. He isn't sentimental, doesn't say much about it, but I see and feel it in all he says and does. And it makes me so happy and so humble that I don't seem to be the same girl I was. I never knew how good and generous and tender he was till now, for he lets me read his heart, and I find it full of noble impulses and hopes and purposes, and I'm so proud to know it's mine. He says he feels as if he could make a prosperous voyage now with me abroad as mate, and lots of love for ballast. I pray he may, and try to be all he believes me, for I love my gallant captain with all my heart and soul, and might, and never will desert him, while God let us be together. Oh, mother, I never knew how much like heaven this world could be, when two people love and live for one another. No one can read that with Laurie, but it sounds very similar. Um, Writing in the letter, how she Amy has also become a bit more softer in the way she sees the world, and the way she sees herself. And she gives Laurie lots of credit, and that she sees him in a whole new way. And what? How this thing continues, and that's our cool, reserved, and worldly Amy. Truly love has worked miracles. How very, very happy they must be. And Joe led the rustling sheets together with a careful hand, as one might touch covers of a lovely romance, which holds the reader fast till the end comes, and he finds himself alone in the work a day wrought again. By and by, Joe roamed away upstairs, for it was raining, and she could not walk. A restless spirit possessed her, and the old feeling came again, not bitter as it once was, but a sorrowfully patient wonder why one sister should have all she asked, the other nothing. It was not true, she knew that, and tried to put it away, but the natural craving for affection was strong, and Amy's happiness woke the hungry longing for someone to love with heart and soul, and crying to where God led them to be together. This very much echoes Louisa's own loneliness, and how very lonely Jo feels herself. Feel free to chat, people. How do you see this chapter? And are these letters similar, the way Louisa writes them in Little Woman? Up in the garret, where Jo's unquiet wanderings ended, stood four little wooden chests in a row, each marked with its owner's name and each filled with relics of the childhood and girlhood, ended now for all. Jo glanced into them, and when she came to her own, leaned her chin on the edge, and stared absently at the chaotic collection, till a bundle of old exercise books caught her eye. She drew them out, turned them over, and relived that pleasant winter at kind Mrs. Kirk's. She had smiled at first, then she looked thoughtful, next sad, and when she came to a little message written in the professor's hand, her lips began to tremble. The books slid out her lap, and she sat looking at the friendly words as if they took a new meaning, and and touched and touched a tender spot in her heart. Wait for me, my friend. I may be a little late, but I shall surely come. Now, of course, the only adaptation that has Friedrich and Joel writing letters to each other is the 2017 series. And unfortunately, I have lots of problems with that series as well. Why it is so difficult for modern media to show a female character feeling lonely and vulnerable. Now, why did Greta Gerwig included the part of Jo feeling lonely and next moment having her right almost accepting Laurie's proposal? I don't know. It bothers me. Let's continue. Oh, if he only would! So kind, so good, so patient with me always. My dear old Fritz. I didn't value him half enough when I had him, but now how I should love to see him, for everyone seems going away from me, and I'm all alone. And holding the little paper fast, as if it were a promise, yet to be fulfilled. So laid her head down on a comfortable rag bag and cried, as if in opposition to the rain pattering on the roof. Was it all self pity, loneliness, or low spirits? Or was it in the waking up of a sentiment which had bided its time as patiently as its inspirer? Who shall say? People really don't speak enough about this chapter. So, what was this thing that Jo was missing? Sorry, my cat is eating very loudly there on the background. When Louisa wrote this letter, she was very, very rich woman. She was making $2 million a year. And what I checked, it's $21 million nowadays. She was filthy rich. And yet she writes in her journals how I longed for freedom and never found it. When shall I get my award? So she was never satisfied. She was only always yearning for something, and she never really gave herself a break. And of course, Louisa was very ill um, for half of her life because of the mercury poisoning. But the money didn't really give her that satisfaction. Let's read a bit more about. It was easy to promise self-abnegation when self was wrapped up in another, and heart and soul were purified by a sweet example. But when the helpful voice was silent, the daily lesson over, the beloved presence gone, and nothing remained but loneliness and grief, then Jo found her promise very hard to keep. How could she comfort father and mother when her own heart ached with a ceaseless longing for her sister? How could she make the house cheerful when all its light and warmth and beauty seemed to have deserted? When Beth left the old home for the new, and where, in all the world, could she find some useful, happy work to do that would take the place of the loving service which had been its own reward? She tried in a blind, hopeless way to do her duty, secretly rebelling against it all the while, for it seemed unjust that her few joys should be lessened, her burdens made heavier, and life get harder and harder as she toiled along. Some people seemed to get all sunshine and some all shadow. It was not fair, for she tried more than Amy to be good, but never got any reward, only disappointment, double, and hard work. That pretty much echoes what I just said about Louisa. So Jo, in this chapter, when Beth dies, she promises to herself and to Beth that she's going to take care of the family. In a way, she says that she's going to take the cheerful spirit of the home, but she can't really do that because Jo is not Beth. Jo is Jo. Poor Jo! These were dark days to her, for something like despair came over her when she thought of spending all her life in that quiet house, devoted to humdrum cares, a few poor little pleasures, and the duty that never seemed to grow any easier. I can't do it. I wasn't meant for a life like this, and I know I shall break away and do something desperate if somebody don't come and help me, she said to herself when her first efforts failed, and she fell into the moody, miserable state of mind which often comes when strong wills have to yield their, to the inevitable. Jo is very desperate at this point. Life, the way she had wanted to live it, has not gone the way she had expected it to be. I'm sipping my tea here at the same time. But someone did come and help her, though Jo did not recognize her good angels at once because they wore familiar shapes and used the simple spells best fitted to poor humanity. Often she started up at night thinking Beth called her, and when the sight of the little empty bed made her cry with the bitter cry of an unsubmissive sorrow, "Oh, Beth, come back, come back!" She did not stretch out her yearning arms in vain, for as quick to hear her sobbing as she had been to hear her sister's faintest whisper. Her mother came to comfort her, not with words only, but patient tenderness that shoots by a touch, tears that were mute reminders of a greater grief than Joe's, and broken whispers more eloquent than prayers, because hopeful resignation went hand in hand with natural sorrow, sacred moments when heart talked to heart in the silence of the night, turning affliction to a blessing with chastened grief and strengthened love. Feeling this, Joe's burden seemed easier to bear, duty grew sweeter, and life looked more endurable, seen from the safe shoulder of her mother's arms. This actually reminds me of a scene in Anne of Green Gables when Matthew dies, and then Anne says to Marilla that his grief is something that we share together, and no one else can really relate to that. And of course, Fredrik has also lost a sister, his sister Minna, and there's a there is a fan fiction where John Fredrik actually visits that grave. I should totally read that in the podcast. I mean, in Greta Gerwig's film, Louis Garrel's character, Louis Garrel, Louis Garrel's Fredrik says that it's difficult to lose a sister, but because the movie doesn't mention that he has actually lost a sister, you don't get any context. Sorry, I need to close the window. It started raining here. Finnish summer rain. When aching heart was a little comforted, troubled mind likewise found help. For one day she went to the study, and leaning over the good grey head lifted to welcome her, with a tranquil smile, she said very humbly, "Father, talk to me as you did to Beth. I need it more than she did, for I am all wrong." "My dear, nothing can comfort me like this," he answered, with a falter in his voice and both arms around her, as if he too needed help and did not fear to ask it. "Hi, Jimena." Always get excited when people in the chat room. I recently talked with somebody on Instagram how they were always disappointed the way Beth is portrayed in the films, that there always seems to be something missing from her, that she is too angelic and too perfect. A lot of people who read the book say the same. And Louisa, she had a tendency to canonize the people who passed away. And you can somewhat see this the way she wrote about Amy in Joe's Boys, and also about the way she wrote about Lizzie in Beth's character. And someone might even argue that the way she wrote about Friedrich in about Henry in Friedrich, but we don't really know. And in the 19th century, there really was a custom that you should not speak bad of the passed away people. And but Beth in the novel, she is a lot more nuanced character, and she has this quite self-deprecating sense of humor that I think most adaptations completely ignore and completely miss. Maybe the 2018 film has a bit of that She doesn't take herself too seriously. And in the novel, in the first part of Little Woman, she feeds her pet bird too much and the bird dies. So pet is not a perfect person. In a way, she's a bit too caring, at least in that chapter. Then, sitting in Bet's little chair close beside him, she told her troubles and resentful sorrow for her loss, the fruitless efforts that discouraged her, the want of faith that made life look so dark, all the sad bewilderment which we call despair. She gave him entire confidence. He gave her the help she needed, and both found consolation in the factor, for the time had come when they could talk together not only as father and daughter, but as man and woman, able and glad to serve each other with mutual sympathy as well as mutual love. Happy, thoughtful times there in the old study, which Joe called the church of one member, and from which she came with fresh courage, recovered cheerfulness, and more submissive spirit. For the parents who had taught one child to meet death without fear, we are trying now to teach another to accept life without despondency or distrust, and to use its beautiful opportunities with gratitude and power. They are all dealing with grief in very different ways. Joe's father, it seems that he closes himself to the study, but it is a shared grief, and he's happy to um, help Joe because it helps him to cope with his grief. Other helps had Joe humble, wholesome duties and delights that would not be denied their part in serving her, and which she slowly learned to see and value. Brooms and dishcloths never could be as distasteful as they once had been, for Beth had presided over both, and something of her housewifely spirit seemed to linger round the little mop and the old brush. That was never thrown away. As she used them, Jo found herself humming the songs Beth used to hum, imitating Beth's orderly ways, and giving the little touches, here and there, that kept everything fresh and cozy, which was the first step toward making home happy, though she didn't know it, till Hannah said, with a approving squeeze of the hand, "You thoughtful creature, you're determined. We shan't miss that dear lamp if you can help it. We don't say much, but we see it, and the Lord will bless you for it. See if he don't. See if he doesn't." So Joe tries to take Bet's place, at least for a while, and in a way it's helps. As they sat sewing together, Joe discovered how much improved her sister Meg was, how well she could talk, how much she knew about good womanly impulses, thoughts, and feelings, how happy she was in husband and children, and how much they were all doing for each other. Marriage is an excellent thing after all. I wonder if should blossom out. I wonder if I should blossom out half as well as you have if I tried it. Always perusing I could, said Jo as she constructed the kite for Demi in the topsy-turvy nursery. I have always liked that scene because the model that Jo has for marriage and then from Meg and John, and they can and what Meg and John does, they show Jo a healthy mother model of marriage where a person does not lose their identity. It's just what you need to bring out the tender, womanly half of your nature, Jo. You are like a chestnut burr, prickly outside but silky soft within, And a sweet kernel if one can only get at it. Love will make you love will make you show your heart someday, and then the rough burr will fall off. Frost opens, chestnut burrs, ma'am, and it takes a good shake to bring them down. Boys go nutting, and I don't care to be backed by them, returned Joe, casting away at the kite, which no wind that blows would ever carry up, for Daisy had tied herself on as a on as a bob. Meg laughed, for she was glad to see a glimmer of Joe's old spirit, but she felt it her duty to enforce her opinion by every argument in her power, and the sisterly chats were not wasted, especially as two of Meg's most effective arguments were the babies, who Joe loved tenderly. Grief is the best opener for some hearts, and Joe's was nearly ready for the bag. A little more sunshine to ripen the nut, then not a boy's impatient shake, but a man's hand reached up to pick it gently from the burr and find the kernel sound and sweet. If she had suspected this, she would have shut up tight and been more prickly than ever. Fortunately, she wasn't thinking about herself, so when the time came, down she dropped. How can I have missed this beautiful scene? So interesting. This reminds me there were when Henry Thoreau died and Louisa was at the funerals. Uh, Waldo Emerson kept a speech about Henry, and he was quite critical about him because they had fallen out. Their friendship was not in a good standing, and Louisa was very angry about the speech and very critical about Waldo after that in her journal, which I thought was very interesting. And maybe I will make an episode about it. Now, if she had been the heroine of a moral storybook, she ought at this period of her life to have become quite saintly, renounced the world, and gone about doing good in a mortified bonnet, with tracts in her pocket. But you see, Jo wasn't a heroine. She was only a struggling human girl like hundreds of others, and she just acted out her nature, being sad, cross, listless, or energetic, as the mood suggested. It's highly virtuous to say we'll be good, but we can't do it all at once, and it takes a long pull, a strong pull, and a pull all together before some of us even get out our feet set in the right way. So had got so far. She was learning to do her duty, and to feel unhappy if she did not, but to do it cheerfully. That was another thing. She had often said she wanted to do something splendid, no matter how hard, and now she had her wish. For what could be more beautiful than to devote her life to father and mother, trying to make home as happy to them as they had to her, and if difficulties were necessary to increase the splendor of the effort, what could be harder for a restless, ambitious girl than to give up her own hopes, plans, and desires and cheerfully live for others? Let's repeat that. What could be harder for a restless, ambitious girl than to give up her own hopes, plans, and desires and cheerfully live for others? It sounds like she's trying something that she's not happy with. Providence had taken her at her word. Here was the task, not what she had expected, but better, because self had no part in it. Now could she do it? She decided that she would try, and in her first attempt she found the helps I have suggested. Still another was given her, and she took it, not as a reward but as a comfort, as Christian took the refreshment afforded by the little arbor where he rested as he climbed the hill called difficulty. Why don't you write? That always used to make you happy, said, said her mother. Once when the, once when the desponding fit overshadowed Joe. I've no art to write, and if I had, nobody cares for my things. We do. Write something for us, and never mind the rest of the world. Try it, dear. I'm sure it would do you good and please us very much. I don't believe I can, but Jo got out her desk and began to overhaul her half-finished manuscripts. An hour afterward, an hour afterward, her mother peeped in, and there she was scratching away, with her black pinafore on and an absorbed expression which caused Mrs. March to smile and slip away, well pleased with the success of her suggestion. Jo never knew how it happened, but something got into that story that went straight to the hearts of those who read it. For when her family had laughed and cried over it, her father sent it, much against her will, to one of the popular magazines, and to her utter surprise it was not only paid for, but others requested. Letters from several persons whose praise was honor followed the appearance of the little story. Newspapers copied it, and strangers as well as friends admired it. For a small thing it was a great success, and Jo was more astonished than when her novel was commended and condemned all at once. I don't understand it. What can there be in a simple little story like that to make people praise it so? She said, quite bewildered. There is truth in it, Jo. That's the secret. Humor and pathos make it alive, and you have found your style at last. You wrote with no thought of fame or money and put your heart into it. My daughter, you have had the bitter, now comes the sweet. Do you do your best and grow as happy as we are in your success? Yes, Jimena, I agree. Somebody does care. Joe is not alone in this world. So the story is honest. That's why it becomes so popular. Now, Little Woman, Louisa May Alcott, she did not ever really fully appreciate it. And I think it was because she writes about her love life in literal disguise. And well, you all know she got tons of letters asking her to marry Joe Laurie, which we do not approve in this podcast. But I think Louisa is a master of realism, and I'm not only talking about a little woman, but also her adult stories and stories she wrote to magazines that were based on realism. And there is a quote from Goethe that Louis had highlighted that the best literature is always based on real experiences. So even when we talk about the love stories in Little Woman, they work because they are based on real experiences. And this applies to Amy and Laurie and Joe and Friedrich. But also, Louisa did struggle with the label that she was given as the children's book writer, even though she herself was also behind that label. It was very difficult to get away from that. A bit like here in Finland, Tuve Jansson, who wrote the Moomin books, she always saw herself more as a fine artist, and yet people always labeled her as the writer of children's books because they were very popular and they, well, make her money. And this is something that a lot of writers have suffered, that they see themselves as something else than the uh, world around them. And Louisa did want to write adult stories, but even though she does succeed well with the children book, I don't think Louisa hated Little Woman because in her diaries, when she's in her 20s, she has this draft story which tells about the family, which is, well, the original Little Woman, and yet she recycles the story again when she's in her 30s. Louisa was hesitant, but she said she doesn't really like girls, only boys. Didn't she? If there is anything good or true in what I write, it isn't mine. I owe it all to you and mother and to Beth, said Jo, more touched by her father's words by any amount of praise from the world. So taught by love and sorrow, Jo wrote her little stories and sent them away to make friends for themselves and her, finding it very charitable work to such humble wanderers, for they were kindly welcomed and sent home comfortable tokens to their mother, like beautiful children whom good fortune overtakes. When Amy and Laurie wrote of their engagement, Mrs. March feared Jo would find it difficult to rejoice over it, but her fears were soon set at rest, for though Jo looked grave at first, she took it very quietly and was full of hopes and plans for the children. Before she read the letter twice, it was a sort of written duet wherein each glorified the other in lover-like fashion, very pleasant to read and satisfactory to think of, for no one had any objection to make. Now in Little Woman, so first is shipping Meg and Laurie, then she is shipping Beth and Laurie, and then she is shipping Amy and Laurie. Now there are people who say that well, this only shows how Jo is feels fear of commitment, but to Laurie romantically, and I think it's because Jo wanted Laurie to be her brother. So what is the more natural way to get someone to be your brother and to marry them to your sister? So yeah, she never had anything against Amy marrying Laurie. You like it, mother, said Jo, as they laid down the closely written sheets and looked at one another. Yes, I hoped it would be so. Ever since Amy wrote that she had refused Fred, I felt sure then that something better than what you call the mercenary spirit had come over her, and a hint here and there in her letters made me suspect that love and Laurie would win the day. How sharp you are, Marmee, and how silent! You never said a word to me. Mothers have need of sharp eyes and discreet tongues when they have girls to manage. I was half afraid to put the idea into your head, lest you should write and congratulate them before the thing was settled. Are there any Amy and Laurie shippers here, besides Jimena and myself? I'm not the scatterbrain I was, you may trust me. I'm sober and sensible, though, for anyone's confidant now. So you are, dear, and I should have made you mine only I fancied it might pain you to learn that your Teddy loved anyone else. Now, mother, did you really think I could be so silly and selfish after I'd refused his love when it was freshness, it, if not the best? Can somebody tell this to 2019, Joe? I knew you were sincere then, Joe, but lately I have thought that if he came back and asked again, you might perhaps feel like giving another answer. Forgive me, dear. I can help saying that you are very lonely, and sometimes there is a hungry look in your eyes that goes to my heart, so I fancied that your boy might feel the empty place if he tried now. No, mother, it is better as it is, and I'm glad Amy has learned to love him. But you are right in one thing. I am lonely, and perhaps if Teddy had tried again, I might have said yes, not because I love him any more, but because I care more to be loved than when he went away. But the more I tried to satisfy myself with all sorts of natural affections, the more I seemed to want. I'd no idea hearts could take in so many. Mine is so elastic. It never seems full now, and I used to be quite content with my family. I don't understand it. That is true, unfortunately. Well, can we just highlight this thing what Joe is saying here? I don't mind whispering to Mommy that I'd like to try all kinds. It's very curious, but the more I try to satisfy myself with all sorts of natural affections, the more I seem to want. I'd know I had no idea hearts could take in so many. Mine is so elastic, it never seems full now, and I used to be quite content with my family. I don't understand it. I do, and Mrs. Smart smiled, and her wise smile as Joe turned back the leaves to read what Amy said of Laurie. She's saying that she wants to be loved. Is this natural way of people growing? At least most people. Maybe I guess I read this again. It is so beautiful to be loved as Laurie loves me. He isn't sentimental, doesn't say much about it, but I see and feel it in all he says and does, and it makes me so happy and so humble that I don't seem to be the same girl I was. I never knew how good and generous and tender he was till now, for he lets me read his heart, and I find it full of noble impulses and hopes and purposes, and I'm so proud to know it's mine. He says he feels as if he could make a prosperous voyage, now with me abroad as mate, and lots of love for ballast. I pray he may, and try to be all he believes me, for I love my gallant captain with all my heart and soul, and might and never will desert him, while God lets us to be together. Oh, mother, I never knew how much like heaven this world could be when two people love and live for one another. Amy is quite a poet. And that's our cool, reserved, and worldly Amy. Truly love has worked miracles. How very, very happy they must be. And Charlotte must sheets together with a careful hand, as one might should cover a lovely romance, which hosts the reader fast till the end comes, when he finds himself alone in the work again. So this early quote that I read, it came from Caroline Tickner's May autobiography from 1920s. But you can read Louisa's quotes about her loneliness from other books as well, like from, sorry, I need to check. Well, I will put them in the show notes. I hate it when a name comes to your mind and then you just forget it, and it's just at the tip of your tongue. By and by Jo roamed away upstairs, for it was rainy and she could not walk. A restless spirit possessed her, and the old feeling came again, not bitter as it once was, but a sorrowful, patient wonder why one sister should have all she asked, the other nothing. Why one sister should have all she asked and the other nothing. Seriously, who are these people who say that Jo didn't want to fall in love and get married? Who are these people? Did they read books? It was not true. She knew that and tried to keep it away. Natural craving for affection was so strong, and Amy's happiness was a hungry longing for someone to love with heart and soul, and cling to, while God led them to be together. A bit tired, but was unquiet wanderings ended third folio wooden chest in a row. each marked with its owner's name, and each filled with relics of the childhood and girlhood ended now for all. Jo glanced into them. When she came to her own, leaned her chin on the edge, and stared absently at the chaotic collection till a bundle of old exercise books caught her eye. She drew them out, turned them over, and relived that pleasant winter at Mrs. Kirk's. I think the scene in the 1994 film when Joe starts to write Little Woman kind of echoes this entire um, chapter. But I have so many problems with her and Freddie arguing in the film. But it's also nice the way it shows loneliness, but also how she's thinking of Friedrich when she puts the flower to the manuscript and writes her name to the papers. I have so many contradicting things about the movies. It's insane. She had smiled at first, then she looked thoughtful, next sad, and when she came to a little message written in the professor's hand, her lips began to tremble. The book slid out of her lap, and she sat looking at the friendly words as if they took a new meaning and touched a tender spot in her heart. Wait for me, my dear friend. I may be a little late, but I shall surely come. In the 1978 series, which which has somewhat a controversial reputation. There's a really nice scene when uh, Professor Bear is in New York and Mrs. Kirk shows him a something that Joe has written and published, and he's like muttering, "My Joe." I should watch it again. I borrowed it to my sister, and she hasn't returned it yet. Oh well, it's on YouTube. Oh, if he only would. So kind, so good, so patient with me. Always, my dear old Fritz. I didn't value him half enough when I had him, but now how I should love to see him, for everyone seems going away from me and I'm all alone. And holding the little paper fast as if it were a promise yet to be fulfilled, Jo laid her head down on a comfortable rag bag and cried as if in opposition to the rain battering on the roof. Was it all self pity, loneliness, or low spirits? Or was it the waking up of a sentiment which had bided its time as patiently as its inspirer? Who shall say? That was the end of the chapter. Yes, I agree. What are being said in the comments? It is a very uh, sad and almost heartbreaking chapter, and it's not just caused by Betsy or Amy, Mary, and Laurie. It's this is something that Emily and I discussed in one of our uh, podcast episodes we did together. And Emily said that in a way, Jo herself creates her own loneliness because she believes that nobody can love her or that she cannot find anyone who loves her. And I think this is very true. And if you think about Friedrich's characteristics, and then Jo's characteristics, how she is sort of this person who easily snaps. It's very difficult for her to find someone who accepts her the way she is. So in a way, Emily is right, and Jo does create her own loneliness, and that itself uh, makes a Little Woman a lot more psychological novel. But it also shows how important it is uh, uh, that Louisa created Friedrich's character. And if you have listened to me speaking before, I agree with I agree with the Algot schoolers who say that, in a way, Louisa gave Jo her own happy ending because she could not have that for herself. Was it then because Henry had passed away, or that she could not find anyone to love her, or somebody like him, because she clearly had particular taste when it came to men? We don't know, but it does seem that Real Woman in a way represents what Louisa wanted herself, and then there is the belief that she had for afterlife, because in her journal she writes, "When shall I get my award?" And this comes from a woman who makes $21 million a year with her books. She was not very happy person, and in a way it does make the story a bit more tragic. And all these team arguments within Little Woman fandom um, less meaningful. But I had really fun time reading this to you, and I hope you enjoyed my rambles. And if you have not subscribed to my channel, you can do that now. And next week I will be doing a podcast episode about adaptive attractiveness and Friedrich's adaptive attractiveness in the films versus the book, because the whole idea in the book is that love beautifies a person. That does not translate well into Hollywood, as you can imagine, but it does. I hope it gives people something to think about. So thank you so much for joining me, and take care, and I will take care and make good choices. Bye.